I know that you have dug into the deposition of Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who was a friend of Jeffrey Epstein. You've printed out and, dug through this in depth. Earlier this month, he did speak before a House panel, but under heavy restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those was that it was not recorded.
Yeah.
I want to play a reaction from a couple members of Congress to how this deposition went, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Sure.
Howard Lutnick was aware of these things. He knew. It just demonstrates the culture of enabling these crimes and allowing rich and powerful people like Jeffrey Epstein and all of the other disgusting rich and powerful men who committed these crimes to continue. Because people like Howard Lutnick knew these things were happening because they were all over the news and continued to engage and legitimize somebody like Jeffrey Epstein.
He's lying. And today's transcribed interview is part of the ongoing cover-up because the American people deserve to see the video of what's taking place in there. They deserve to see the sweat on the secretary's brow as he struggles to answer basic questions about his lies to the American people. So we're going to continue.
So that was Congress members Ansari and Walkinshaw reacting to that hearing. What were your big takeaways from this, from his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, who he clearly was not completely honest about for years, and just how he went about this process with all of these restrictions in testifying?
Yeah, so it's very interesting because, a long time ago I was writing an article about Epstein's apartments, the apartments on 66th Street, and I walked by his house, his, well-known New York mansion, and somebody on Substack said, "Turn around, that's Howard Lutnick's house." And I said, "What?" And so I Googled it and I realized they share a wall. I mean, they could not be more of neighbors than sharing a wall between our two homes. And Lutnick bought the house in 97. Epstein was already there. He bought it from the Comet Trust, who had bought it, it was all wrapped up in Leslie Wexner and Epstein. And again, there is no receipt for sale, right? He remodeled it, and then they moved in 2005. And so much of this, I was commenting on this, that the semantics of this deposition will absolutely kill me, because the amount he goes around in circles about what a word means and what I means and what we means, he's clearly lying, because you don't need to do all that if you're telling the truth. You could just tell the truth. And the biggest thing is, he said that he was grossed out. He didn't hang out with Epstein, and yet, 5 years later, they're off to the island to have lunch with all their children. He was asked if he knew anything about Epstein's criminal history at the point that they went to the island. And I just did a quick search about how many headlines there were about Jeffrey Epstein in just New York City alone, having to do with his criminal history and his sexual history. And there was hundreds, let alone that he would have disappeared for 13 months, right? When your neighbor disappears for 13 months, you notice. And so there's no way for him to have not known that this was part of Epstein's history. The whole story about how sketched out his wife was about him and his house, and you would never turn around. I mean, I can only speak for myself. I would never turn around at any point and say, "Yeah, but I'm going to come visit you with my children," right? If I was that afraid, if I was that, if I saw anything of a sexual nature in someone's house, I would never be like, "Well, I'm going to bring my children around." That's just common sense. So I know that there is a lot of fudging having to do with that, but there are just specific things where he gives numbers of times that he's communicated, and you can just go into the files and count, and you're like, nope, that's not true. And, I give some leeway to memory, but there is so much conversation about them talking about starting a lawsuit with the Frick because the Frick is building, and they're, the view of the park, and they're meeting, and the tough thing with very, very wealthy people is they all have assistants. So sometimes this is all going through assistants speaking to assistants. And so they use that as a means to say, well, I never got that email. I didn't see that email. That was all through my staff. But there is, months of prep to go to the island. He claims he didn't know. It was casual. It was just last minute spontaneous. We have all the emails of scheduling. We have the emails of them leaving and where should I park the dock, at the dock. Like everything that he says is really easy to vet by just reading their emails and searching by his last name in the files. You can just find it. Epstein donated $50,000 to Lutnick's, congratulatory dinner for his company. He showed up everywhere. They knew each other. I don't know that they were great friends, but they were definitely in each other's lives for 20 years. And so much of this he has lied about, and then we've had something come out and he's had to backpedal. We have his full podcast where he says everything about blackmail and all the things that we know about Epstein, and then he backpedaled all that for the deposition and said that he was just showboating for a podcast. So he is not a reliable narrator. He is not somebody, he's one of a very long list of people in this story that, yes, we have them on the record, but no, we don't believe the things they say.
Yeah. I know that you have raised the issue that journalists are being targeted by the Department of Justice and others, who are watching who exactly is downloading and writing about these files. Mm-hmm. Members of Congress have raised this as well. Pam Bondi famously brought in, into her prep for that famous hearing, information about the members of Congress that had gone in to see a lot of the Epstein files that not everyone else had access to. Mm-hmm. So what kind of precautions and protections should citizen journalists take under these circumstances?
I always say, especially when they just drop files, to be very careful. We saw this with the last big file drop in January, that they very heavily unredacted pictures of child abuse. There were full sections that include all unredacted photos of child abuse. And, the conspiratorial side of me might think, that is to catch people who are actually investigating these files with things on their hard drive that might constitute child abuse. And so that was a big red flag alert that everybody spoke up and said, the second you see something, shut it down, get it off your computer and report it to the DOJ immediately. Some are not as, terrible as that, but we found full sections of girls' driver's licenses with their names and social securities on them. And these were survivors. These were not perpetrators, but it was all their photo identification, their passports, everything, and it was fully unredacted. And so those are things to report immediately to the DOJ, but also take note of, because they absolutely violate the Transparency Act. That is a clear violation of that. But as far as protecting yourself, if you are considering yourself to be someone who is really, really heavily investigating these files enough that you're willing to put your name and face on it, there's really simple ways to do sort of internet protection that protects your location and your information, that are very simple little memberships. And we started to have to think about that. I have been very blessed to be sort of enveloped into the sort of mentorship of older and more experienced journalists ahead of me who have taught me a lot about ways to protect myself. I come from the generation of posting your kids' photos on Facebook, no big deal. How to be much more careful about that kind of thing. And so it's just a lot of that. It's protecting yourself, but it's also protecting, who you find in these files, because we know obviously that the redactions are not on the side of survivors, which is the intent of the redactions. They are only on the side of protecting reputation, which is a clear violation, again, of the Transparency Act, in those exact words, that we are not supposed to be protecting somebody based on their reputation. So those are the major things I always say to look out for, but especially when they first drop files, because they will be heavily unredacted in the worst ways.